Beruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Lamed Vov Amud Beis. 5 lines from the top at the new Mishnah. The Mishnah discusses when a person makes Erev Tchumin al Tnai on condition. At the time of Knisas HaShabbos, it's not yet known whether the Tnai will be miskayim. Only on Shabbos does it become apparent and become clarified. Now it's worthwhile to mention again the yesod of Erev Tchumin. A person lives in a bayis and he has therefore 2,000 amos in all directions. If he wants to be kind of shvisa in a certain direction, he can really then have 2,000 amos from that new place. In other words, he doesn't gain more than 2,000 amos, only he changes the place where he is then situated on the onset of Shabbos. So therefore, if he lives in the bayis and he wants to then change tchumin from where he is to the east, so he can then make koine shvisa 2,000 amos to the east, and now from that new place where he was koine shvisa, he now has 2,000 amos in all directions, including another 2,000 amos to the east. But of course, from the original bayis, he cannot even go 1 amma to the west. Says the Mishnah, Masne Odam al Eruvoi. A person makes a Tnai on the Eruv. Now he sets 2 different Eruvin, and you can only have 1 Eruv be valid. So he puts 2 Eruvin out. V'oimer, and he states the following Tnai condition: Imbo Nochrim min ha-Mizrach Eruvi l'Marav. If the Nochrim come from the east, then he wants to then be able to then flee from them. So he's going to then have his Eruv be effective from the west. So he can then be going 2,000 amos addition to where he is from that west where he was koine shvisa then. Imin hamariv Eruve lemizrach. On the opposite, if they are coming from the west, then he wants that his shvisa be nikne on the east, where he's able to then flee another 2,000 amos to the east. If they come from both directions, then I will then have the opportunity to be kind of shvisa in either way, and I will then choose which direction I want to be kind of the shvisa, to the east or to the west. If they do not come from either direction, then I don't want either Erev Tchum to be Chal, whereby I'm going to then have my original ear as being my 2,000 amos. The Mishnah goes on to say another scenario, this time talking about a Chacham. And here the Mishnah wants to say that wherever the Chacham is coming from, he wants to then not flee, but actually go closer to where that Chacham would be, to then be able to encounter him on Shabbos or on Yontif. If the Chacham comes from the east, then I want my Eruv to be Chal in the east. If he comes from the west, then I want it to be Koine on the west. If he comes one Chacham from one direction or one Chacham from the other direction, I want to be able to choose which direction I am Koine the Shvisa. Loy lekan v'lo lekan. And if no Chacham comes in either direction, then I want my original Shvisa to be with my ear. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer, Im Haya Echad Mehem Rabbi Holich Eitzel Rabbi. Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on the latter case that he says if he has a scenario where one Chacham is coming from one direction and his Rebbe is coming from the other direction, then Rabbi Yehuda says that he certainly had the intention to then be kind of shvisa on the direction where his Rebbe is coming from, and therefore he cannot then choose that he wanted to be kind of shvisa in the other direction where the Chacham is, where somebody else might be coming from. But indeed, like the Chacham said, if both directions are coming a Rebbe from each direction, then he can go ahead and choose then which direction he wanted to be kind of the shvisa from. Says the Gemara, Ki Asa Rav Yitzchok, when Rav Yitzchok came, meaning he came from Eretz Yisrael to Bavel, Tani Ipcha, Kula Masnisen. He taught the entire Mishnah Ipcha. That means the opposite, in the reverse, as follows. He taught that the case of the Nachrim in the Reisha, where if the Nachri were to come from the east, then he would be able to koine shvisa on the west, was actually the opposite. That when the Nachri would come from the east, he wanted to be koine shvisa in the east. And also, similarly, when it came to the Seifa, he taught the opposite. When the Chacham would come to the east, then he wanted to be koine shvisa in the west. So exactly in the reverse, in the way that was taught in our Mishnah. So kasha Nachrim anochrim, kasha Chacham achacham. So this teaching of Rabbi Yitzchak is in contrary to our Mishnah, and therefore it's a contradiction to the cases of the Nachri, and a contradiction of the cases of the Chacham. Nachrim anochrim loy kasha. The Gemara answers the Reish is not going to be a difficulty because ha b'parchav no ha b'mari demasa. The Nachrim that teaches that he wanted to flee from, like in our Mishnah, where if they come from the east, he wanted to be able to flee and have koine shvisa from the west. That's because these are tax collectors, so he wants to flee from them. But that which Rabbi Yitzchak is talking about those Nachrim that are city officials, where they want to actually go and speak over certain city matters with them. And therefore, if they come from the east, they want to be koine shvisa in the east. Chacham ha-chacham lo kasha ha b'moisi pirki ha b'makri shma. The case where the Chacham comes from the east and he wants to then be koine shvisa in the east, as the Mishnah stated, that's talking where the Chacham is coming, he's a renowned lecturer, and therefore he's coming to give a shiur. And that's why he wants to then be koine shvisa in the same direction where he's coming from, so he can participate in the shiur. Whereas that which it states by Rabbi Yitzchak, that if he comes from the east, then you want to be then koine shvisa in the west, that's because we're talking about someone who's teaching Kriya Shema and Tefillah. For that, he's not interested in being koine, and therefore he wants to go to the other direction. And therefore that resolves the teaching that Rabbi Yitzchak had brought with our Mishnah. The next part of the Mishnah states that Rabbi Yehuda argued and stated that if he has two Rabbeim, one coming from one direction, coming from the other direction, then he cannot choose like the Tanakama which direction he wanted to be koine shvisa from, but rather the assumption is that he wanted to be koine shvisa from his Rebbe and not from the Chacham instead. So therefore, if the Rebbe came from the east and a Chacham came from the west, he must then have been koine shvisa only from the east, where the Rebbe is coming from. So we'll quote the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer im haya echad mehem, if one of them was his Rebbe, then hoylech etzel rabbi. Says the Gemara, Rabbanon zimnin deneicha le bechavrei tfemi rabbi. The position of the Chachamim in the Mishnah that states he can choose either one is because even though his Rebbe is coming from the east and a Chacham, a comrade, is coming from the west, but sometimes he preferred to hear a lecture from his comrade from the west than his Rebbe from the east, and therefore it's not muchrach that he intended then be koine shvisa from the direction of his Rebbe. Omar Rav makes the following statement: Lesin lemasnisin, our Mishnah is not accurate. Midetani Ayo, from the fact that Ayo taught a brisa in contrary to our Mishnah. Detani Ayo, for Ayo taught the following in our brisa: Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein Adam Masne al Shnei Dvarim Keechad. A person does not make a t'nai on two things together. Ella im bo chacham lemizrak eruv lemizrach, im bo chacham lemariv eruv lemariv. If a chacham would come from the east, so again we're talking the scenario like we said in the Mishnah, where he put out an eruv to the east, 2,000 amos to the east. He puts out an eruv 2,000 amos to the west. A chacham comes from one direction, then he was koine shvisa in that direction. So if he comes from the east, he's koine shvisa from the east. If the chacham were to come from the west, he's koine shvisa from the west. Aval lekan lo. But if he comes both from the east and from the west, there's two different chachamim, then we don't say that he was koine shvisa in one of those two directions, and he can choose afterwards which one was the one that he had intended to be koine. No. Ma'ishno asked the Gemara, lekan lo. Why is it that this is not going to be valid? the Ein Breira, because you'll say he doesn't have the mechanism of Breira. Breira means that the event has not yet occurred, and we're going to then retroactively determine what is the status of this Eruv based on the event that will occur on Shabbos. So ask the Gemara, the reason why you're saying it doesn't work in the case of Lekan or Lekan is because there's no Breira. You don't hold a Breira, and that's why you're saying it does not work. Then the Mizrach Lemariv Nami Ein Breira. Then the same way that you're saying that when he were to come from the east or only come from the west, it would work. That's also only happening because of the mechanism of Breira. That only because of the event that he came to the east, and you put out a Eruv in that direction, as well as the direction to the west, and you then said the fact that on Shabbos he would have come to the east will then megale, will then reveal retroactively that your intention was to be koine shvisa to the east where he came. That should also not be viable. It should also not be valid because you're saying that you don't hold a breira. Rabbi Yochanan v'kvar b'chacham. Rabbi Yochanan answers and says, no, the reason why when he says, I'm going to then be koine shvisa either in the east, if the chacham comes to the east, or in the west, if the chacham comes to the west, is because there we're talking about a scenario where the chacham already came from the east. And therefore, on the onset of Shabbos, he came only, the one who was ma'ariv, who put out the Eruv, did not know about it. So therefore, he was really koine shvisa when the chacham already came on the onset of Shabbos, only he did not know it was a gilui milsa on Shabbos. Ask the Gemara, Adarabba, Lesin lida'ayoy. We can say the opposite, that indeed the teaching is not like ayoy, mimas nisin, but rather we can learn that our Mishnah is really the valid, the correct teaching. The Gemara says, Loi sal kedaitach. No, you cannot say that. Why? The hosha minan leile Rabbi Yehuda, the less le breira. Because we already learned that Shita's Rabbi Yehuda is that there is no breira. And therefore, it must be like Ayo was teaching, this nan. Because where do we know that Rabbi Yehuda says that there's no breira? It says in the following, it's really a braisa. Halokeyach yayin mi ben akutim, one who acquires wine from kutim. Now, this is before there was the gzeir of yayin nesech, and thereby wasn't prohibited to use the wine that was acquired from the kutim, only that the kutim does not take truvas and maisrus. So who acquires it does have to take truvas and maisrus. So it says over here in the Bryce, on top of Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, Oimer, he should say, Shnei lugin shani osi lahafrish, 2 lugim out of the 100. We're assuming they have 100 lugim of wine. So 2 lugim he takes out for truma, because truma midrabban either 1/40th, 1/50th, or 1/60th. The Beinoni takes 1/50th, which is really 2 lugim out of 100. So he takes out 2 lugim orally out of 100 for his truma. Haharein tehei truma. Behold, these are truma. Asara, he then takes 10 out of the, really it's technically 98, but we're rounding out and saying out of the 100, he takes now 10 meiser as meiser rishon to give to the Levi. Tisha, 9, meaning because now we're assuming that there's 90 left. Again, that's rounding out. So 9 out of the 90, another 10%. That's Meiser Sheni. He then takes the Meiser Sheni. He's now, for that, he's Meichal. He then puts and redeems it onto a Matbeya. That he can do. And that he must do. But the Truma and the Meiser Rishon is just oral. It wasn't doing anything. The wine is still in front of him. Only saying within this wine there's going to be 2 parts Truma. And then he's going to say that there's 10 parts that's going to be Meiser Rishon. So it states of Yiveshoyse Miyad, Divrei Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that he can drink this wine right away. In other words, Rabbi Meir is of the opinion that what he did was that he then was able to take Trumas and Maisris using the concept of Breira. Even though right now he didn't mafrish anything, but after he will drink, we'll say that whatever's left over in this yayin, part of it is truma that he'll then ultimately take when he has a kli to then pour it into, and part of it was meiser, and he'll pour from that into a kli for meiser, and he'll then fulfill his obligation of trumas and meisers using breira. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Shimon, Oisrin. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda amongst the sages of Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Shimon say it's prohibited. It means to say that they don't hold a breira. So we see that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold a breira. Therefore, we cannot say that the Mishnah is the correct version, but rather Ayo's version is correct because Rabbi Yehuda holds that there is no such thing as using the concept of breira. Ula said, Lesa la'ayo mimas nisin. He says no, that the correct version is indeed from our Mishnah, and this comes to exclude Ayo's version. Ve'elohodik tani Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Oisin. What are you going to do with the statement we just had in the Brisa that Rabbi Yehuda states that it's also to do this because l'chara you can't say the concept of breira. Answers the Gemara, Ula zuzi kitani. Zuzi means zugi. That means that it was taught in pairs. As follows: Div Rabbi Meir v'Rabbi Yehuda. That both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda say that he can go ahead and drink because of the concept of breira, that it's valid. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Shimon, Oisim, because they don't hold a breira.